So I've made a few of these videos now, and you may notice if you've been following along that I'm not in my fancy studio. This is an iPhone video because I'm not at home. I travel for part of my work and am in a travel house, so to speak. And I've been making a list of different topics from basically over the last 8 years about things I've learned but as I typed the last one, probably a list of 15 things, I typed how to rebuild a life. And it made me pause. It made my heart beat or my blood pressure do something. It made me feel and emotions connected to a lot of pain, a lot of fear, kind of flooded in, because somehow I did, but it's one of those things that the goodness of and the joy that I have in my life now, I would wish on anybody, but how I got here is like you wouldn't wish on your worst enemies type thing. But maybe you would, because if it would bring them ultimate joy, and that's one of those weird things about suffering. So I mentioned in an early video, you can go back like my first video about this little corner of the internet, how I made a decision that cost me a job and a career and an identity and a hobby, my favorite hobby that had turned into my job, and what you might consider feeling like your life's calling, and friendships and reputation and trust. And even my family for a certain time. So I was not left with very much. My dignity was gone. So I'll tell this story. After that event, and a friend of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think you need a job." And he was a contractor. And that was the first gift out of a long, long line of gifts that I was graciously given. So I strapped on my work belt and my work boots, and he invited me to lunch and said, "You ready to go?" So I literally left from lunch to go help demo. And one of our early projects during that season was building out a carport on the side of a house. And in that process, we started at the foundation. We started at the dirt. We started at the bottom. We started at the beginning. So to rebuild your life, step one is to start at the beginning. And in that same time period, I started therapy for the first time. And where do you start? How do we get here? Let's go back as far as we can to the beginning. And so we started building a foundation, and I'm sitting there helping level, gravel, lay rebar, tie rebar, dig ditches for French drains, and set pathways for sidewalks, and cut rebar, and then wait for the cement truck to arrive, and then start that process. And it was slow, grueling, cold, and not fun. You know, when you look at construction, and a lot of times, like if it's in your town and you're driving by it often, and it seems like all of a sudden, you know, you see that stuff being done, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, that was quick. What you don't notice is like all the foundational work that takes much longer than the actual like build out. And that's the fun part, the exciting part, what you see. But the foundation is not sexy. It's not fun. It's hard. It doesn't look like you're making a lot of progress. And I just was watching, doing this work for a job as it was happening in my life. That was humbling. But I was so thankful for the opportunity to rebuild my self-respect. Just that much. And so rebuilding a life is starting at the beginning and rebuilding a foundation, and hopefully a stronger one than you had built before, one with more intention, one with more purpose, one that can stand the test, that has integrity. Number 2, that's with yourself, is rebuilding relationships. I had a life that in such a way that the before times were big and lots of friends and stages and attention, perceived types of status and energy. And isn't that just, you know, there's a part of you that has to grieve that loss, but then it's like, it's so dangerous to just try to go back to that. What's the quickest way back? And the quickest way back to that is a quick way back to failure. So the next step is rebuilding relationships. And I think I haven't done a lot of 12-step work, but I think that that's kind of part of that process, is the amends and that kind of thing. And that was a process, some letter writing, some rejection, you know, obviously all an apology. But it was not public, it was not known, it was not big, it was not proud, it was only hopeful. And in those relationships, like a marriage relationship or a family relationship, Like you don't start with trying to make the perception of your world relationships, the influential relationships, the ones that count on some kind of social status relationships. You start with the ones that you broke, the ones that you damaged. That has to be the priority. And I used to sing this song called From the Inside Out, and it's probably considered cheesy, or it's old now. But that is where healing has to happen. And it's just a cheesy thing to say, but from the inside out, like from yourself, and then from the inside relationships. And the rebuilding of trust is not, I'm sorry doesn't rebuild trust. The right words don't rebuild trust. Only the right action over time rebuilds trust. And because if you've betrayed people's trust with your words or your confession, then your words are cheap and they don't have much value. So all you have is what you can do. And accepting that there's not a time scale for people's trust being rebuilt. And that if you want trust to be rebuilt and you want to find love in a relationship, then you're willing to accept that. What's 3? 3 is to rebuild a life, is you do have to gain self-respect. You have to cast a new vision for yourself, or maybe your family. And for me, that meant a new career, going back to school, and it meant casting aside the old dreams, the old hopes, because they weren't appropriate. And I think that the temptation is to go back to those because, isn't this who I am? But who you were is how you got to the place of utter destruction or whatever. So a new vision, because it's going to be too messy if you try to integrate too soon. You have to separate from your past. So a new vision, and in that you need new vocabulary, you need new relationships. So step number 3 is new vision, new relationships. Because if you're trying to understand how you got to that place that you got to that led to destruction in your life, you have to dismantle those pieces and look at all of them, each of them closely, and be like, what was here? What was in this? Were there things in this part of my life that were contributing? And if they were, can I separate those things out and hold on to the good? And that's not an easy process, because for one, you're looking at these things that you used to love or do love, but they're not a part of your life anymore. And every step just must also be completely wrapped in honesty with the people that you're rebuilding trust with, and honesty with yourself in every step of the way. So regaining a vision for your life, small successes. For me, that was a 80 on a college algebra test. That was finding that you can excel in a science class. that was then helping tutor people and building new friendships. And I need to make this point that, and I did earlier, but just that therapy I was walking through these steps in therapy, in multiple therapies at times, psychological therapy. So that is, I would suggest that if at all possible, in any way that you can. So 4, begin to heal. And what I mean by that is there are things, if your life explodes, there are things that are damaged. Old hobbies, old passions, old relationships, and not just relationships with people, but your relationship to, say, your interests or your hobbies or your passions. And if you've laid those aside because they maybe had too much power in your life at one time, how you heal in them is how they come back into your life in a way that is healthy. And sometimes you can know that the time is not right. And I had situations where people wanted to invite me back into certain aspects of my life that I didn't feel like I was ready for, or maybe other people weren't ready for. And I had to actually say no to things that I used to love because I didn't feel like I was ready. And maybe if I was, maybe, but I didn't feel that way. Because I don't think, and even I had a therapist even kind of push me to it, but I don't think he understood at the time how big a place that passion or that calling or whatever held in my heart, and that it wasn't healthy for me to reapproach that soon. And by soon, I mean like 2 years. But I didn't reapproach that until 7 years. So it's like, so healing, things have to heal. For me, early on when things are pretty blurry, and there was some music that was really helpful to me by certain artists. So one of them I will always treasure and hold dear is Andrew Peterson and his Darkness Before the Dawn album, because I was in the darkness hoping that there would be a dawn. And he has some songs about depression on there and being kind to yourself when all you want to do is sit in shame. So, but there came a point, because music had been this really large part of my life, that for like 15 years, that then it started to become painful. And mainly whenever I started a new career, that's when it became painful, because I felt like, okay, last nail in coffin, and let's put that away. And it died. Or it felt like it did. And that's the first time I actually experienced depression. The feeling of being on a couch and feeling like you're just sinking into the couch. And so that was going to take some time. And after it, and my wife, music is a big part of both of our lives, and she has just an incredible voice. A voice that haunts people. That's so good. And she was like, it was 2021, and my life fell apart in 2016, so it was 5 years. And she said, hey, you need to get music figured out this year. And I was like, I don't know how. And a buddy of mine called me on that spring and was like, hey, let's do a concert together. I was like, what? You know, this is the tail end of COVID, and he's a very talented musician out of Nashville. And he came, we were both from the same hometown. And so I considered it, and I said yes. And we got some buddies together from college and high school and played all these awesome 90s cover songs and 2000s cover songs. And it healed me. It healed me. But it wasn't something that I went looking for to try to reclaim and recapture. It was a gift of healing. He didn't know. I mean, I think he kind of knew, but he didn't really know. My friend didn't. And so healing then is just not a fast thing. It's not a quick thing. It's not a quick thing whenever you've had surgery. You feel like it should be quicker. I say that as a nurse that takes care of people that have surgery all the time. It's not a quick thing if you had a personal injury. It's not a quick thing. It's in its own time. And if you're lucky, you get to have therapists to help you rehabilitate. And then the healing is the joy that you receive to have back what may have been lost, if that's mobility or function or music or whatever it is for you. And the whole journey is not a straight line. I had a friend of mine describe it as, if you really want to heal, it's going to be like crawling over jagged glass, broken glass. And he was kind of talking about repentance, honestly. But it is so good to have healing in your life. It is so good to rebuild your life. So that's my hope for anybody out there. And, you know, if you have any other thoughts on that, hit a comment down at the bottom. And if you want to kind of just keep following along with this, hit the subscribe. And we'll see you next time.